There we go. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Yeah, I want to give a quick shout out to the venue, which the shirt that I
Yeah.
got when I came and visited. And yeah, I just want to start off by saying I was out in Colorado and I stopped by the venue a couple of weeks ago. And as soon as I rolled up, I just thought it was such an amazingly beautiful and cool complex. And I'll overlay an image in when we publish it. But my understanding is the first net zero venue across the country. I want you to tell the story, but it's tucked away in the mountains. It's just absolutely beautiful exterior. You walk in, totally state of the art. It's nestled in this really beautiful community. I'm just such a fan of what you have going on over there, and the programming. Shout out to Kendall, is just incredible. But why don't I let you tell us about the venue? Why don't we start off with what the venue is, and then work into like the whole net zero operation? I think that's just really incredible.
Yeah. So we are TACAW. TACAW is an acronym for the Arts Campus at Willits. And what you came and visited was our first phase of what we hope will be a larger campus that we build over time. But this first phase is pretty exciting all on its own. It is the first net zero performing arts center in the country, which we're super proud of and leaning into, trying to serve as a model for other communities and other venues around the country. And our venue is highly flexible, 250 seats when the seats are out, 450 standing, with a really nice lobby space that looks out at the mountains. We're in the community of Basalt, Colorado, about 14 miles down valley from Aspen, where we met, and just a beautiful, great community nestled into the mountains, and one that is really supporting our nonprofit arts and culture center, which is great. We've got a full all-electric kitchen. As a net zero facility, there's no gas line at all that comes into the building, which was a choice we made during construction. It was a conversation, do you put one in just in case? And we said, no, we're going to really stand in this space. And so we maxed out solar on the roof, and we are net zero after a year plus of operating. We're generating more power than we're using, which is awfully exciting.
I was on mute there. That's amazing. So no gas line. That's fascinating. I love that. Like when, I think that's so interesting with it's like a Tesla, for instance. Like you can't put gas into that thing.
Yeah.
So are you seeing it? So it's the first performing arts center that's net zero. Is there other concert venues, and have you seen anyone else? And have they taken that kind of like Tesla leap of faith? Like, hey, there's no gas coming into this thing. Like it's not even an option.
So there's lots of work being done in the space, obviously, to try to green the touring business and the arts economies around the country. As far as we can tell, we are still the first net zero and only net zero art center, but there's a lot of movement. So E-Town Hall in Boulder is very efficient. They aren't at net zero, but they're working on it, and I know others are as well. Part of the challenge is, you have an older building that you have to retrofit. It gets very expensive to do. We had the luxury of building from the ground up and designing it to be net zero. And there were some challenges in doing that we could get ahead of, because, as I said, we were building it from the ground up. For example, one of the things that we did was to compartmentalize the areas within the building that get different uses. So our office space, which is separate from our lobby space and our theater space, the office space has its own HVAC system that we can run when we're here working, but there's no patrons and no artists here. The theater space is isolated from the lobby space. So again, if we're hosting a small event just in the lobby, or the restaurant might be open, we don't have to heat or cool the giant theater, which is obviously very expensive and energy intensive to do. So some of that design work was done by our architects, Lipkin Warner, early on, to make sure that we thought that stuff through. So we're only using the energy we need. And then obviously when we have a show and it's, you're packed to the gills with people, all the systems are running. But as I said, even after a year of running full steam ahead, we are at net zero. And that's really exciting. One of the great things that we have as a luxury as well is our utility company, which is a really great utility called Holy Cross Energy. They're at the forefront of going to renewables. They set a goal of going to renewable energy by 2030. They're going to be there by 2025. So if we do go in a day, we need more power than we generate, which could happen if we have a snowstorm here and we have a show that night. We're still able to buy renewable energy from them. But even with that, we're still putting more energy into the grid than we're consuming.
That's super fascinating. I did wonder that, because you're tucked away in Colorado, and obviously it gets extremely cold in Colorado, and that's what happens there. Is if you're not able to produce energy, you can just buy it from this sustainable setup.
Yeah, and that's a huge advantage that we have with Holy Cross Energy having a sustainable option. But there's other things that we've learned to do. We opened in September last year, and energy usage was great. We had our first snowstorm. Energy production was great, and then suddenly after the first snowstorm, production just dropped off. And obviously, it's because we had snow over the solar panels, and thought, it'll just melt off. But we went a week and there was just no energy production because the snow didn't melt off. It came in too heavy. So we actually have a team now that a couple of guys that we hired that go up there after a snowstorm, and just like you shovel the sidewalks, you shovel the solar. So little modifications like that, but obviously totally worth it to make that effort to keep generating power, because sustaining that net zero rating is really important to us.
That's one of your goals you had said it is to inspire other people to do this. And I think you making it work in Colorado, having to shovel snow off of the panels, dealing with freezing cold weather, gives almost no one an excuse, not to call people out, but it's very fascinating. I hadn't thought about the challenges of that. I'm going to ask them elementary questions, because I'm sure they're out there. If there's 500 people at the venue, if you have a sold out show, does it require less energy to heat because people are essentially conductors, and part of it was building the building to just keep heat in? So
a couple things that are really interesting. One is that it's a little bit counterintuitive, especially in the winter, because you think, you've got 500 people at a dance show, right? A rock and roll show where people are dancing on their feet. And then they're jumping around and they're sweating. You think in that case, you're going to have to you're going to have to really crank the system to cool it down. But here in the winter, we have this really cold air outside. So our system actually can pull in air from the outside and exchange the air, so we don't have to do a ton of intensive cooling. We're just using the air that's outside, which is really handy. Obviously in the summer, it's a different story. You're cooling that air and it's pretty energy intensive. But in the winter, we take advantage of the fact that we have this cold air and you have these warm bodies creating heat, and you just sort of balance the two to keep it comfortable. And that works really well. We found some efficiencies, particularly in the theater, because we wanted to have a really really quality insulation. And what we found is that we had two purposes served by having really strong insulation and thick walls. One was the heating and cooling. We're able to trap and keep that air that we've already warmed up or cooled down. But the other is from a audience and artist perspective, the sound in the room is great, because we have such thick walls, is that they deaden the sound and they hold the sound. And then also you can have a screaming concert happening inside, and you walk outside the building and you're like, do you hear that? No, I don't hear that, because it's really, really good insulation, which is nice in a community that you're not blasting people away who are parking their car or living across the street.
And just to call it out, because not a lot of people have been at the venue. I mean, there's condos wrapping around this place, and I will post a picture of that. But that's interesting that those two work together. The efforts to keep heat in and keep the environment out also works well with just plopping a venue in a neighborhood. And it's, I've been out there late at night when we've had the system cranking, and you really can't. If you're right up against the wall, you can. That's incredible.
But otherwise it's dead quiet. So, and there were some interesting design challenges we had to overcome. Some of the feedback we got from the efficiency folks was, put your HVAC and heating systems as close to the space that they will be heating, so you're not having all this duct running all around, and you're basically heating and cooling these ducts. But the acoustic people said, well, move those big HVAC units as far away from your theater space as possible because of the spillover noise when those units come on and off. So we had to sort of split the difference. And what we ended up doing is moving the HVAC units to the roof of our kitchen, because if you hear them in the kitchen, it's not a big deal, but you don't hear them in the theater. So little things like that we had to work through. But we're still doing it. We're still generating more power than we use. So that's we got some of it right, obviously.
Incredible. And once again, just trying to turn into a third grader asking you questions, super simple questions. Like out of 10 nights where you're dealing with the harshest Colorado weather, how many of those 10 nights on average will you have to borrow electricity from people versus just use the energy that you're generating? And I assume that's the hardest thing to do is the coldest Colorado nights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so the coldest Colorado nights are not as challenging as the hot summer nights.
Oh, interesting.
For the same reason I was talking about before, is you have 400 people at a rock and roll show dancing. They're creating heat, and if you can pull cold air in from the outside, great. Those two things cancel each other out. You get the settings right. In the summer, if there's hot air outside and you have hot air being generated by all the humans, you have a problem that you have to use energy to cool it down. So the hot summer nights are actually the most energy intensive. Of course, we get more solar generation during the summers, right? So those offset each other. Obviously, at night, we're not generating solar. So we're putting power onto the grid during the day and then pulling power from Holy Cross at night. We did look at and have the option to put batteries in our basement, and had conversations with our provider about doing that and actually being a bit of a local storage hub. But because our utility provider is so far ahead of the game with storage and efficiency, the smartest thing for us to do is just to send the energy right back into the grid and let them manage it. Now, if they come to us down the road and say, hey, we need more storage, we have room we can put it. But what we do is during the day, there's a few staff here working generally, maybe getting ready for a show, maybe there's a load in. We're sending tons and tons of power onto the grid. And then at night, we pull back what we need from all renewable sources.
Interesting. So it's cooling the building that is more challenging. So out of, on a 365-day calendar, is it about 50% of the shows where you're not having to like net get more energy, or is it less than that, where you're able just to produce energy you're using without? And obviously there's the process of sending it to this facility, but I guess I'm assuming there's like a process saying, well, on this night, did we actually have to borrow more than we?
Yeah, and we have an interface that shows how much we generate versus how much we use. One of the advantages that we have that I think is going to be challenging for an urban venue that may be open 7 nights a week, we're open 3 to 4 nights a week, and those are not all high production shows with huge audiences. Sometimes we do a lecture with 60 people, like an author talk, or maybe a film with 100 people. So not every event is highly energy intensive, but we are generating power every day because the solar never turns off. So we have that advantage. If we do ramp up to 7 days a week of programming, which I could see happening down the road, we'll have to look at either adding more solar or creating more efficiency to do that, to make sure we maintain that rating. But I think most days that we have a show, particularly in the winter when there's less generation, we're using quite a bit of power to put those on. But as I said, over the course of the year, it gets balanced out because we have those dark days when we aren't programming, but we're still generating.
Interesting. I would love to do a little bit of like myth busting here. So I'm going to ask some like intentionally, whatever, not triggering, but leading questions. Let's explore one myth. You can create a net zero venue, but it's going to cost a lot more to operate.
So, okay. It costs more to build. There's no question about that. Now those costs are coming down. Solar costs are coming down, and the electrification of the entire system is happening. So all those costs are coming down. But here's the thing: is that there's a lot of programs, and we are a nonprofit, so we also had donations that could come in. We were able to raise funds to offset those additional costs. And I would actually tell people who are considering doing this, especially if you're a nonprofit, which a lot of PACs are, you're going to raise more funds than you'll need, because it's so easy to raise money for this cause. Everyone's on the court with trying to do this and making sure that we go green and go electric. You go to those donors and say, we need money to be net zero. They're going to say yes. And then there's all these grant programs and incentives. So if you're not a nonprofit and you can't raise money that way, look into the incentives and the rebates and the granting programs that are out there to get you there. And the costs weren't tremendous in terms of the overage of what it would have been to do it not net zero. And then there's some savings, right? I mean, we get paid for the energy that we put back into the grid. And we don't have a gas bill. And I think over time, those savings will add up. It's over a long horizon, over the lifetime of the building. But I think, the other question that has to be asked is, what is the cost of not going net zero? If you're gonna build new construction and you're gonna bring in a gas line, you're committing to 40 or 50 years of fossil fuel consumption, and the cost of inaction was higher than any fiscal number.
Interesting. I guess, thank you so much for that. Another, I wouldn't say myth or kind of discussion on this topic is I wonder, do you put much thought into carbon offset? And I know, for instance, if you buy a Tesla, there's various calculations and hypotheses about like, all right, there was carbon created to create the Tesla, and at what point does it pay off? I had heard when I was looking at solar in my house that there's a huge range of assumptions out there, and you got to question some of the data because there's people who are actively fighting, the new shift for various reasons, money, But yeah, what's do you think much about, carbon payoff and how at what point those solar panels are just, net producing a carbon payoff? And actually, if you could explain that to the audience, that would be great, and how you think about it, and what do you believe is like a true carbon payoff? Yeah, in terms of as it relates to the venue.
There's the old adage, right? Is that the best car, and from a carbon perspective, is the car you already have, even if it's a gas guzzler, right? Because the cost of making a new car from a carbon perspective is really high. And that's true of any construction. I mean, construction is a carbon intensive process. And if you read Bill Gates's book, he talks about the need to solve concrete as a huge problem from a carbon perspective. It's in steel as well. That being said, there were emissions in building this facility, obviously, because it was new construction. But this community, and I think many others in the future, deserve and want to have art centers, performing arts centers. And so they're going to get built. And so I think what you need to think about is, if you assume that communities want to have access to arts and culture and they're going to build a PAC, how do you build it in the most efficient way possible? And certainly during construction, there was carbon that was released because you have heavy machinery and you have steel and you have concrete, but you want to build the building as green as possible so that over the life of the building, it's going to generate more power in a green way and use as little power as possible. And I think that you have to just understand that communities are going to want to have venues. They're going to want to have access to arts and culture. And so the option is not, you can't say don't build them. These communities want to have them. I think you have to build them in the most responsible way possible, which is what we try to do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point there. So a big obvious question, and I just want to ask it anyway, is the why. I would love to just hear, you said donors are going to step up to do it. People generally want to see the world. Like some of it is like obvious, like do we want to live in a better future tomorrow? And, and climate change and whatnot. But I would just love to hear from you directly. What's your why on it? Why are you so excited to be involved in this net zero project, and what do you think, like the general, like why the industry as a whole, you want to see us move in this direction?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note this isn't my project. This is a community project, and we have a wonderful board of directors and a whole team that's behind it. And I have the fortune of being the face of it, but I represent a whole bunch of us who are committed to this effort. And I think part of the reason is we live at the forefront of climate change here in Colorado, right? We're really close to the headwaters of the Colorado, and the Roaring Fork River, flows into the Colorado River. And so we see the water issues being created. Forest fire is a huge problem here. In 2018, we had a massive forest fire across the street that was terrifying, and it's here. And then of course the snowpack and what happens to the whole industry built around the snowpack up here. So that we're right on the front lines of climate change. We see it, we see the effects of it, and it's front and center in this community. And so when we were looking at the design and construction of this facility, it was just on the table from the get-go. And
this is what year?
So we were designing in 19 and 20, and that's when this conversation got real, which was, okay, what are the costs to go net zero? What are the design choices and implications we have to consider? And
the building was completed when?
We opened September 24th, 2021. And
that sounds quick.
It was pretty quick. Yeah, it was about a year of construction. So we broke ground in the summer of 2020, and then we finished in 2021. But I think there was a commitment from the board, the staff, this community, the donor base to make this happen. And what's exciting now that we have it and have this opportunity to serve as a model is that it's resonating with artists. We had the band Susto here, which I don't know if you know them, but they're terrific. And we were chatting with them, and they really want their next tour to be a carbon-free tour. And we want to help them do that and figure out how do we partner with other venues, whether, maybe early on you have to use carbon offsets to pull that off. But over time, as we get electrification of the trucks and the fleets that are moving the artists around and the venues, artists can go on these tours without releasing any carbon. And I think the beauty of the field that we're in with the musicians and the actors and the performers, they have the spotlight, they have the microphone, they can get people to pay attention. So we really are trying to give them a place where they can do that, and then also hopefully create some waves out into the field and into the communities like ours, and say you can do this as well. And then over time, artists can go on the road and be totally carbon free.
I want to pay homage to an image that's forming in my mind right now, based off of like what you're saying. The more that I learn about in sustainability, is it's a holistic conversation. And you made a point that communities are going to want access to the arts.
Yeah.
So if you're going to build these buildings, but then you can get to these indirect thoughts around sustainability that are tied to that. Like if you live in a thriving, beautiful community, you're going to travel less. And travel, then that's a huge carbon burden on the world, as if everyone is constantly traveling all the time and hopping in planes and escaping. And I think there is a real value that people feel rooted in a beautiful community, and something like TACAW could be that anchor in a beautiful community. You're going to travel less. You're going to just feel better about staying in town, going to an amazing concert, hanging out with your friends, hanging out with your family. Yeah. Community, even though community is not utilizing new technology, it's kind of an ancient technology, is a huge part of sustainability. So it's just something that I, had pop into my mind. And then if you think about these communities forming across the country, with sustainable efforts, and then, the artists going in there and propagating these sustainable ideas, and they do have the microphone, and an amplified voice, then you could really see a movement emerging from this.
Yeah, and the other piece of it too is that the audiences it shows, especially in more rural communities, which is where we are, their carbon footprint to get to and from a show is tremendous, right? And if a person is not going to drive to Denver from here to go see a show, that's a sustainable act. Stay here and see a show. And we try to do little things. We've partnered with a local e-bike and bike share program. So there's a station out front, and we have the bus line right here. And so we're trying to incentivize people to get here sustainably. But because that's a huge thing for this industry to consider, is the audience coming to your venue. How did they get there?
Oh, that's incredible. It's a really beautiful image and vision that you're speaking to here. And I told you this when I visited. I mean, I could see myself living there. Like it's just like it's just really, really cool. Like you walking to, the venue and having a venue that is, providing a wide variety of programming to a community and doing it all sustainably. that's really incredible. And I do want to move more into, what kind of programming you do. But the last kind of question that I have is around construction.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's realistic for existing venues to transform into carbon neutral, or is it just going to be so costly that it's really a project of new building? And then I also want to ask you about it sounds like you nailed it in terms of, or the org nailed it in terms of the build out of the building, but was there any lessons learned and things that you would do differently? It's a big question. Let's just start with, can you convert existing buildings into sustainable, or can it only be accomplished economically with new buildings?
Yeah, I mean, I think any action is better than no action, right? So if you run a venue or manage a venue and it's a gas guzzler of a venue, right? It's a 68 Chevy, but it's a venue. Do something, right? And whether that's better insulation, new windows, obviously solar on the roof, that's a great place to start. But I think if a venue moves 10% towards sustainability and they're nowhere near net zero, they're still 10% better than they were. And over the lifetime of a building, that can really add up. So I think, some action is better than no action. And, it's not letting the quest for perfect get in the way of creating good. And so I think, especially when we'll see what some of the new legislation that kicks in next year will bring, but as I understand it, there's going to be a lot of incentives for electrification. So, we have heat pumps and electric water heaters and all those things, but even if you don't do solar on the roof, take advantage of some of those rebates in your venue and put in electric water heaters and start there. So I think anybody who's trying to be on the court with this, with this effort and this work, you start small and then take it from there. Not everyone's gonna have the luxury of building a new building in a community that supports going net zero with donors that support it. So start with small steps. But I also think there's a shift happening with both the artists and the audiences, and that they want this. I take inspiration from a story that I hope is true because I've told it a bunch of times. But my wife and I went and saw Jack Johnson at the Hollywood Bowl when he first broke out in the early 2000s, and it was a great show. And then, I heard that after that tour, he went back to his agent and said, "I'm never touring again." And he said, "Jack, you're the biggest thing in music. You got a tour." And he said, "Well, look, I'm an ocean guy. I'm a surfer. And then I go on stage after one of my shows and it's just a sea of single-use plastic and litter and garbage." And they said, "Well, Jack, what do we have to do?" And he said, "I want single-use plastic eliminated from my concerts. I want the venues I play at to have water refilling stations for water bottles." And he gave him a laundry list, and a bunch of stadiums around the country converted because this one artist asked them to and demanded it. So I think if artists start to ask for it, if audiences start to ask for it, it can create momentum around it. And listen, we're a small time, little town venue, but I think there's a big wave that we can be a part of that can change this industry.
That's a really beautiful image. I mean, there's so many different directions that I want to go with this conversation, just because it's such a juicy topic. Here's an out there question. So solar is the primary technology, it sounds like, that you're utilizing. Has there been talks of having a windmill on premise? You have a lot of snow melt. Is there something
not a windmill, but we looked, the possibility of geothermal certainly exists here. There's hot springs. I think you went to the hot springs when you were here.
Incredible. Shout out Iron Mountain Hot Springs.
Right. Iron Mountain
Definitely the right pick. Yeah. Thank you for that, rec.
You got it. Local pick. But so geothermal is certainly an option here. It was considered.
Can you explain geothermal, please?
Yeah. So and I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but as I understand it, you dig down far enough, you just dig a super deep hole until you hit the hot water that's naturally heated by geothermal activity, and then you bring that hot water up to do your heating and to create energy. So it's pretty straightforward and simple. You just dig down to access the natural heat, and then you bring it up. So we looked at it briefly, but it didn't given the estimates of how much generation we would have with our solar and how much usage we would have based on our programming, we were pretty confident the solar would cover it, and we were right. Now, I mentioned we want to be a campus one day with more facilities, a larger theater, a mixed-use arts building, educational facilities. As we look at future phases, we will explore the possibility of doing geothermal and seeing what's there. But I think there's all these conversations need to be in the mix if people are looking to build something. And you say, what are the ways to generate power where we are, and how do we take advantage of them?
Interesting. Geothermal, that's a really interesting, cool concept. Are you staying in the loop on kind of like the cutting edge of what's happening with new technologies that are emerging? And, is there anything else besides geothermal that is on the horizon in sustainability that you're excited about or interesting, or even, more in the speculative realms?
I mean, there's a cool project that Aspen Skiing Company is working on, and obviously we ski their mountains, and full disclosure, they're also a donor of ours. They actually have helped us fund one of our environmental projects, a show called Captain Pow, where we teach kids about the environment using superheroes, which is fun.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's a fun one. But they're doing methane capture at abandoned coal mines. And there's all these coal mines that are being left behind because people are stopping mining coal, which is great, but they leak vast amounts of methane. And so SKICO actually has a project where they're capturing that methane that's being released from these mines, just coming out, and converting it to energy. And really, really cool and interesting, specifically here in the Mountain West, where you have these mines all over the place that are abandoned. So that's an exciting project that's certainly out there. The other obviously the holy grail is the fusion, which there was the announcement last week, and it was like, man, I always
let's talk about
it. I've always heard like, oh, it's 10 years away, and for the first time it feels like, well, maybe it is 10 years away, which would be amazing.
And I know you're not a scientist inside of fusion, so don't worry about biffing it, but what's your best understanding of what was discovered and what's possible with that?
And again, not a scientist, but my best understanding is we're a long, long way away. I know what they did a couple of weeks ago, is now a few months ago, but they announced it a couple of weeks ago, is the fusion reactor released more energy than it took to create, but it still took tons of energy to create the reaction. And so it's not scalable. And I think, listen, there's really smart people working on that, and maybe for my kids that will be available. But in the meantime, let's work with what we got. The sun is shining, and the price of solar is getting super cheap, and there's all these incentives coming on to electrify your home, electrify your business. Let's do those things now, and not just rely on some, magical technology to save us 10, 20, 30 years from now. We got to start from where we are.
And I think magic is the right word. There's that old homage that whatever modern technology is the equivalent of magic of the past. And, that's, really true. Just to throw this one out there, and in the circles that I, pay attention to around sustainability, a lot of people are talking about nuclear, and nuclear is, there's a lot of fear around nuclear with the famous crashes, Chernobyl and Hiroshima and whatnot. But when you part the hairs of that discussion, it seems like that's that there's potential for, some very interesting energy production with nuclear technology. Is that on your radar at all? Thinking about a nuclear powered music venue is just hilarious and an image. But do you have any thoughts or ideas on nuclear? And yeah.
I know it's in the mix in terms of the transition to clean energy. I think the investment required for a plant like that is really expensive. And as I understand the economics of those, is that they pay for the nuclear plants, but basing 30 years of usage gets to pay off over the life of the plant. And so I'm not sure that there's a way to create those on a small scale or on a small budget. I think where we are in the Mountain West, with the amount of sunshine that we have, and with what our utility is doing with accessing wind farms and exploring geothermal, there's a lot of other options that are out there. But I think we can't be afraid of any conversation or any option. We have to explore it and look at it and say what makes the most sense so we can make this transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your perspective too. Like, let's utilize what is there right now. And I think, like you were saying, you're creating conversation. So, fission and nuclear and whatever else is potentially out there. We're taking steps towards that. Like, it's like picking up an instrument. Like, if I don't follow around the scales, like, I'm never going to get to playing Beethoven. So I love that you're actually taking action. Some people might say like, oh, well, like, I'm just not going to take any action because at some point, like, nuclear is just going to come in and solve it. Well, it's like, maybe, like, the world needs to, take the steps that, are in front of us. So,
I mentioned the Bill Gates book, but I think people should look at that because he spells out pretty clearly not only the problems that we have, but the technological innovations that are going to be required to solve them. And I think that's the mindset to have is not one of fear, but one of embracing the challenge. I mean, I've got 3 kids and I can't, you can't throw your hands up in the air and be like, well, there goes the planet, or it's just not an option. We got to try to figure this out. And otherwise you're just hopeless, and that's not a great place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. The last little detour here into speculative and interesting technologies. Have you like paid attention at all into the realms of like Bob Lazar and UFOs and these theories around like gravity bending technologies, like technology that's like creating its own gravity that is far beyond anything that we understand? Have you heard anything like that?
I think the closest that I've gotten is that I once had one line on an episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, it's totally in these speculative realms, but there's like, the White House now is like saying, yeah, there's UFOs out there. They're moving in ways that are beyond our like typical propulsion technology. So it's like, it's more fun to like watch.
I've seen some of the clips for sure. Like, how did that move that way? I mean, the footage the Navy put out was bonkers.
Yeah. So there's some theories around that and sustainability and like how we could really solve is just like eliminate the need for like propulsion based energy. But for the time being, solar is a great option.
Yeah. Well, and again, it comes down to, somebody at NASA is going to figure out how to harness a gravity wave to propel a ship to wherever we want it to go to Mars or the moon.
God willing. God willing. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to be awesome. And I can't wait to watch that in the news. In the meantime, I'm trying to make sure that my venue doesn't, burn more carbon than it needs to.
Well, and once again, all these, the advancement of that requires, attention and PR and for us to move in that direction. And that's exactly what you're talking about here is, from that soil that you're laying and sustainable communities around the country are laying, like those, that discovery could be funded through the fruits of that labor. Very, very interesting. I love this topic and I love that you're doing what you're doing. And I guess the last question on, the sustainability front is there anything that you got wrong in new construction that you could advise people to do differently?
Yeah. So, I think from a net zero sustainability perspective, we did a pretty good job in terms of designing this building to achieve the goals that we wanted to get it to. A year and change in, the thing that I really want to focus on and figure out is our waste generation, which I know is a huge topic for venues all over the country. But we compost, we recycle, and we have trash. But the volume of compostable or recyclable material that ends up in the trash is stunning. And I really want to figure out how to lead in that area as well.
Could you compost on site and have gardens on site or something crazy like that? So not crazy, but like, have you thought about this?
Well, we do culinary arts because we have a kitchen, so love to use locally sourced things. And the challenge that we found, this is true at venues everywhere, is that you kind of can't trust the public. And even folks like you or me who are totally engaged on sustainability, it's midnight and the headliner's coming back for their encore, and you've got your can of beer that you bought at the concession stand and it's empty, and the closest thing is a trash can. You just throw it in there because you want to put your hands up and go crazy for the encore. The public gets, when they're in these environments, they kind of lose sight of, is this recycling? Is this trash? Is this compost? So that's a problem. What we've learned is that we compost out of our kitchen, which means my staff will compost. If they've cleared plates or they've cleared organic matter, they'll put it in the compost, but you can't have composting out in the public because someone inevitably will throw a can or a cup in the compost, and then that whole batch of compost is ruined, right? So in our landfill, which has a great composting system here, and they have a pretty robust program, they'll kick you out if you deliver too many batches with waste in them, right? Because it ruins the whole system. So how do we as a venue put systems in place where you can trust the public? They only have either compostable material or recyclable material, and it gets in the right container. I mean, there was a panel at the conference you and I met at where someone was saying that compostable material is probably actually worse for.
What's your perspective on that? I'm sure that the presenter was very well intentioned, but at the same time, he was selling a plastic cup, exactly. That is reused. Okay, okay, go ahead. Yeah,
so, but there's a point there is that if all of, let's say 2/3 of our compostable cups end up in the trash, or worse, recycling, because they don't get recycled, you now have more energy intensive process to build a compostable cup that didn't get composted, right? So I think I don't think the answer is don't use compostable cups, because we use bamboo straws. When we give away straws, people ask for a straw, they get a bamboo straw, right? So we're trying to minimize the amount of plastic that we have, but it's also about then getting whatever is your product you're delivering, whether it's a cup or a straw or a fork, getting it in the right receptacle to go to the right place, to have the right process take place, to have it either be recycled or composted. And those are the systems that we're trying to figure out, so that you can trust the public and you make it easy for the public to do the right thing.
Did I hear you say that you're sourcing food locally as well?
Yeah. So we have a culinary arts arm. We partner with a group called Epicure Catering, and we do dinner and a show. We have a supper club. In the summers, we do lunches. So food is a big part. Obviously, food enhances cultural experiences, right? If you have a movie, we had a movie about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they did food from that region, which was great. So we can enhance an experience with food. And our chefs, Alan and Julia Domingos, are wonderful about trying to find locally sourced everything. So obviously in the winter it's more challenging, but in the summer, they're getting peaches from Payoff, and they're getting trout from the local streams, or they'll get elk from somebody local, as much as they can. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw Neil Young's whole piece. I think it was in Rolling Stone a couple of weeks ago that Neil Young has done. He's done touring unless unless it's green and the food is sustainable. And that's a side note, but like the amount of waste in the green room is extraordinary. And I know artists want to be able to have what they want to have. But how do venues partner with homeless shelters or food banks to make sure that food does not just get thrown away?
Interesting. Neil Young is making headlines for ultimatums lately. This sounds like a really good cause, for the record.
He can play here. He can totally play here.
Yeah, that's all. It's like, have you gotten in touch with his agent?
I've given that project to Kendall, and
I was gonna say it's a good question for Kendall. Yeah, there you go. I'm sure he'd love it. Yeah, that's really cool that you're considering food, and this is another thing that I've discovered with sustainability is obviously we want plastic out of the ocean, and we want to pull carbon, or we want to stop putting carbon into the environment, but really healthy soil pulls carbon out of the environment naturally. And if we only stop putting carbon out there, there's still legacy carbon in the air, and
we ultimately need this cycle, we've kind of destroyed the soil across America, is my layman's understanding of it. I'm not a scientist either. So there's not that like recapture that's happening, and the oceans are super overfished, and we're dragging nets across the ocean. And there's like the Seaspiracy documentary, which was extremely illuminating around that front. So it's, all of these things matter, but food is a really, really huge part of it. And then there's like, it's not so simple, because there's starvation is real, and there's systems that are not necessarily in a great place in terms of its impact on the earth that are feeding people. So it's a heavy nuanced conversation, but you can't have a sustainability conversation without food. And yeah.
Well, the carbon footprint to truck in or fly in meat that's been raised in Argentina or Brazil versus if you can get a locally sourced cow, it's a huge part of the conversation. And I think that's another,
not to mention healthy for the body too.
Yeah. The whole wellness conversation. But I think that's another action people can take individually, or venues can take individually, which is, to think about how do you source stuff more local, what's available to you in your region that has a smaller carbon footprint to get to your venue. And those are important conversations. And again, you may not get to perfect, but you might as well start on the way to good.
Yeah. I mean, amazing conversation just about sustainability and, operating this, awesome net zero venue. And let's talk about the venues, like operation a little bit, and, what kind of concerts are you doing? And, getting having a zero carbon footprint or negative carbon footprint is incredible, but then, you have to have an awesome venue at that point, and that's a part of sustainability as well. So what kind of programming do you do? Like how do you, run your venue, like outside of actually like putting on concerts, and what kind of programming do you focus on? And yeah.
So we do a mix of any kind of performing arts. So music, comedy, theater, film, lectures, kids programming, poetry, multimedia, dance. We do all of it. Music and comedy are kind of our bread and butter, probably compose about 50% or more of our programming. But as a PAC, a Performing Arts Center, we are also a community asset. So we have author talks, we have documentaries, we bring in, bilingual kids programs for kids to come on field trips to come and see. We're committed to doing, dance. We do poetry nights. We do, storytelling. We really do try to have a wide swath of programming. You can go to TACAW.org and get a sample of what we do and see everything that Kendall programs. And there really is a bit of something for everybody. But again, music and comedy are kind of the sweet spot, because I think one of the things that is interesting about a new venue is that you've got to earn the audience's trust. And so presenting, consistently high quality music and comedy, especially names that they're surprised that they get to see. Oh, I get to see Leftover Salmon in this small venue. I get to go see Tignataro at the small venue. People get excited about that, and then they trust you to come see stuff they've never heard of. So Kendall does a really nice job of balancing the known commodity artists with more discovery artists, and also the more mainstream genres with stuff that's a little bit less appreciated. I always describe it as that Shakespeare is paid for by rock and roll.
Absolutely. So what are some ways that your team is, that operates, smoothly, and like what's been like the key ingredients for running just like a good operation with like that diversity of programming?
Yeah. So from an operational perspective, we lean into tech as much as possible. And one of the advantages that we had with opening a new venue was to from the get-go try to implement the right technology to make this easier in terms of how do things get automated, how do we leverage other expertise, and not to have necessarily the in-house piece of it. And so we certainly, we're using lots of different pieces of software to make that happen. A big one, of course, is Prism, which, obviously, well.
Shout out. Yeah.
But we, with Prism, our donor software, which is Neon, and a lot of our HR software, we kind of realized instead of building expertise in-house, we can outsource it. And one of the great things that Kendall did was when we were getting ready to open, he said, look, this Prism software will create efficiency that, in the long run will pay huge dividends. And in how our team, from offers going out to production advancing to settling shows, it's all getting really streamlined. And we're still only, I would say, about 60 to 70% fully implemented, because we are still learning the capacity of what's there. And so that's been really helpful to us. And we did it from the get-go. It wasn't like we built a system and then we came to find that there was software that could do it more efficiently. We just said, let's go get the software and implement it from day one. That's been really effective for us.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. And, I think picking the right technology and making sure your team is operating efficiently is also hand in hand with the sustainability conversation. Like a lot of sustainability, it's about eliminating carbon and doing good for the planet, but like the root word is sustainable. Like, are we operating at a sustainable pace and relying on technology to streamline tasks instead of just, having people doing unsustainable tasks is in my perspective what we're trying to help the industry with. And it's cool to hear you talk about that. And I'm connecting the dots between that being totally aligned with running a sustainable operation.
Well, and it's also the more efficiency that you create for your staff, the more capacity they have to think about problem solving other issues at the venue. So if my box office team is totally dialed in and can move people through and get them in here quickly and efficiently and not have a bunch of pissed off patrons trying to figure out where their tickets are, that allows them to think about how to streamline other areas of the business. Or super simple, we have at the entrance, and you've been to the venue, we have 2 sets of double doors to trap the hot and cold air, right? If you have a front door that opens into the space, every time a patron comes or goes, you're letting cold air or hot air in or out, and it's producing the efficiency. And when we first opened and we had longer lines, they were going out the door. And my team was able to figure out right away, how do we streamline this? And we move the line quickly. And then we created 2 lines, and then pretty soon we don't have a line at the door that's keeping the door open, which means we're losing hot or cold air. So there's little things like that you find those efficiencies and your building runs better.
That's a beautiful image. And, something that I'm tapping into right now is, whether it's Prism or, becoming negative net carbon footprint, constantly tweaking your process. It's all about just getting better and better into the future and ushering in a more beautiful reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think also that from the patron perspective, they appreciate the efficiency and speed that comes from, if you really want a paper ticket, we can give you one, but you really don't need one. And everything will move quicker if we're not having to check, your paper tickets and tear it and hand it back. And I think in this day and age, people more and more, they want that kind of streamlined, easy experience. We appreciate that Prism does a lot of that innovating for us. We get to lean into what you guys are innovations you come out with and say, oh yeah, we wouldn't have thought of that. We're really glad we have you on the team.
Yeah, that's certainly a part of it is, I think our best customers are always looking to tweak and improve their process, and we're doing the same as well. And something that I said to you is, you had said you're 60 to 70% utilizing the software. And I think compared to some, you're 100% utilizing the software. But the truth is, it's like asymptotic. Like, you're going to keep tweaking and improving your process. We're going to keep doing the same. And I think that's a really beautiful future, is working with various companies that are all, trying to create a more and more, sustainable environment and tweak their process and get better. I'm curious to hear, what you talked about expanding the campus. Is this just where do you think this goes in the future, with TACAW? And is there a certain point where the vision is complete, or is it something that you're going to want to constantly just improve and get better and better, or maybe a combination of the two of those things?
So I have there's a couple of answers to this question. The personal answer is that when Eddie Vedder plays the venue, I can stop, but that's just a personal preference. I think the real answer is that Our vision is to have a campus here where we have a larger theater as well as the theater we currently have, educational facilities, community facilities, rehearsal facilities. And that's our vision for where we are. And that is a net zero campus, even when we're fully built out. The big vision, Matt, is net zero tours, that we are one of a network, one of many networked institutions around the country, for profit, not for profit. And artists on their electric fleets can get to and from these venues, plug in, charge up their vehicles, do their show, and go to their next show, all net zero. One of the things that's fascinating is that as I've sort of gone diving into this conversation about how artists travel around the country with their shows, I've learned that from Basalt to Denver is one of the hardest routes in the country for electric vehicles, and specifically electric trucking. And the reason for this is that we've got a couple of mountain passes and Glenwood Canyon, which gets closed with some frequency. So you basically got 3 spots that can get closed for long periods of time because of weather. And you have extremely cold weather, which is a nightmare combination for batteries, right? So a lot of people have said, if you can solve the Basalt to Denver route in terms of moving artists to and from, that's the hardest 140 miles in the country. So figure that out and you can then scale it up. So, right now, we're exploring the option to just use a Tesla and bring comedians up, because comedians, it's one person, right? It's super simple. There's no gear. It's just them and their jokes. But that's a start. And then if we could figure out how to get a band up here, and then maybe a larger tour with a rig. But if we can help solve that route, we could then be a model for this larger network of venues
Incredible.
artists can go to. So that's the big vision. I think when we get there, we could stop.
That's amazing. And part of what you're doing is doing the work locally as an example. Are you seeing, off the top of your head, is there another TACAW that's out there, or a few others out there? And who are they, if they are? And then depending on that question, I'm wondering, if you're not seeing it happen in other communities, is this an initiative that you might take on and build the next one in, I don't know, Santa Fe, New Mexico, or whatever? Yeah.
So for sure, I mean, it's a really important cause that I've certainly taken up and the team has taken up. And obviously arts and culture are my passion, but you can't live in this day and age and not have climate be a key issue for you. It's so huge to address. So, I do know that I mentioned it before, E-Town Hall in Boulder is really, really green. They're not net zero, but they are on the court, and they are standing in this space as well. And, collaborating with them on some micro routes is a great place for us to start. I also know that this conversation is starting to pop up at industry events, right? The conference we were just at, Kendall's going to the Folk Alliance conference in February, and he's actually going to be presenting about our work and what we do and how other venues can work on this and how artists can do better. So I see it entering the zeitgeist of the industry, which is great. And I think we're just going to keep trying to lead by example and then share whatever knowledge that we gain with others who are looking to do this. And obviously it's a different ball game for a 20,000 cap room, for a stadium. But maybe we can be a model, maybe the lessons that we've learned here can be applied other places, or inspire someone else to think about their large cap room and they make some innovations and they do it. So we're just trying to do our part, and we're certainly going to lead this space as much as we're allowed to.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really beautiful thing to have a thriving network of net zero venues that are out there. Do you think, given technology to date, is a 20,000 arena? Is it, I guess possible is not the right word. Everything's possible, but is it economically plausible given the technology that we have right now? And if not a 20,000 arena, I mean, you're making it happen with 500 capacity, and you see a vision to getting the campus up to speed. Like where do you think is the edge of what's economically plausible right now with sizes of venues?
Yeah, I mean, I think seeing what our energy utility is doing and how successful they are. I mean, they're going to be net zero, or not net zero. They're going to be carbon free, all renewable energy by 2025, and that's a major utility. And so that tells me that any venue can do this, right? It's a matter of putting pressure on the utilities to invest in renewable projects for generation. And sometimes those venues, you have to pay a premium for that renewable energy versus buying the cheaper fossil fuel energy. But I think if utilities are able to get there, it changes the game completely. I also think that artists are going to be a big driver of this change. If major artists, I come back to the Jack Johnson story, if major artists start refusing to play venues that don't go green and choosing ones that are going green, that's a pretty big economic incentive for those venues to make the shift. So I don't think there's a cap on what's possible. I think it's a matter of how quickly we get there.
And to your point, whether you go net zero or you're taking really serious efforts to, to not just pay lip service to it, but to start transitioning to a more sustainable future, then everything matters. Every single action matters, whether it's putting on, solar. Well, I guess, I just want to wrap up like on a personal note. And what were you doing? So this got built in 2020, or it launched in 2021, I think you said, and 2019, the plan was starting. What were you doing before this?
So I was an actor and producer for a long time in LA. Was sure that I was going to be a movie star. And then I got into arts administration because I was always the guy that my friends were like, hey, will you help me put on this play, or will you help me produce this short film, or whatever it was. And when I got into arts administration, the world just kind of opened up, and I've been beating my head against the wall trying to get acting jobs for a long time. And then suddenly it was like, oh, here, let me open this door for you and open this door for you. So I leaned into it and really found a passion for creating space for other artists to perform and creating, venues and places where artists can present their work to audiences and create that connection. So leaned into that. And I was, prior to coming to TACAW, I was at Center Theater Group in Los Angeles, which is actually the largest nonprofit theater in the country, doing great work for them. But the chance to bring my family back to Colorado and then be part of this exciting effort that we've been talking about to go green in the arts and culture world was just one that I couldn't pass up. So here we are. Yeah.
And so, I mean, you have a background in performing arts is what it sounds like. And I think an inspiring message to leave people with is if I'm not mistaken, you didn't go to college for environmental engineering or anything like that. And you were able to come in and help execute on this project. So there's no excuses out there.
That's right. That's right. Even
let's be inspiring, not guilty, for the record.
Even a lowly theater major like me can help in some small way.
I believe in your, if you still want to be in a movie, you can make that happen, by the
way. We'll see.
Well, this has been awesome. It was such a pleasure to meet you and stop by and see the operation. I really encourage anyone who is interested in this topic to stop and see the venue, especially if you're in the area, and to catch a show. And if there are some venues out there that are in this space that are trying to create sustainability in the concert industry, it sounds like you would be a good person to reach out to, and you're actively looking to build a network. So is that right? I guess reach out to me and I can connect you. Or
absolutely 100%. I want people to go to tacaw.org, see what we're up to, reach out. We want to know who's doing what in this space. We want to give voice to any artist who's trying to put together a tour that's greener. We reach out to us. Certainly venues. We want to know what they're up to and the successes that they're having. And if there's communities out there that are thinking about building a performing arts center, we're happy to share what we've learned. So we're thrilled for the chance to talk about this. We're stoked to have Prism as a part of our success, and I look forward to many more trips down the hill with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should organize a sustainability conference at TACAW in the summertime or something.
That is a fantastic idea. Yeah.
In music industry sustainability conference.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. Sure.
It's on the podcast. If there's anyone who is interested in seeing that come to life, I think that could be really fun. And
we
yeah,
have sustainability
go
conversations here. We have little one-offs, a film or a panel, but I think the idea of a weekend, especially around this industry where there's such seems to be a groundswell of interest. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I'll just close by saying, thank you for taking this conversation. Thank you for being an early adopter of Prism, and I really appreciate being a part of your operation. And I see a really big vision in the work that you're doing, and it's a big inspiration of mine, or a big hope of mine, to like live in a beautiful community. And I think mostly because it's rooted in sustainability and quality of life and health, and all of these things tie together. And it's just amazing to be a part of it in a small way with Prism. It's amazing to see this come to life, and I really think it's a beautiful vision that you're shepherding here. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the chance to talk about it, and I really do. I'm sincere when I say that others who are out there who are listening or watching, or ideas, Matt, that you have, we want to hear about them, because we solve this problem by working together, and let's just keep working at it.
Yeah, and it's a big problem. And at the root of it is making life on Earth beautiful and sustainable. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Well, hey, thanks a lot. Let's wrap with that.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, you bet. All right, I'm restarting the podcast right now, because I'm just remembering that I didn't get a chance to hear the Star Trek story, which is a crucial part. So I'll go. What's the Star Trek story, Ryan?
All right. So this is back in my former life, when I was acting a little and auditioning a lot, there was the Scott Bakula's show, Star Trek Enterprise, and they had me interviewed for a bunch of different roles over the course of the show, and never booked any of them. And then my agent called me one day and said, "Hey, we just got a call from casting. The show's getting canceled." And they said, "Do you want to be on the show?" And I was like, "Yes, I want to be on Star Trek. I grew up watching Next Generation, the original. And of course, I don't care what it is, I want to be on the show." So they're like, "Great, we'll get you on the show." So they send me the script, and it wasn't just one line. It was just one word. I literally had a rifle, and I just went, "Sir."
Can you send me the YouTube video of it? Do you have?
I will find it and send it to you.
Oh, I need to see it.
But I got to wear a Starfleet uniform, so that's all that counts.
Yeah, that's some beautiful foreshadowing there of you being involved in projects of the future, which is certainly what TACAW is.
There you go.
All right, with that, we're wrapping. All right, here we go. Right. Thank you. Hold on.